Good afternoon.
Hi, Lori.
Good afternoon.
The live stream is started, so once Miss Petty lets us know there's a quorum, then Madam Chair will be ready to start.
Great, thank you.
Madam Chair, we have a quorum.
Thank you, Miss Petty. All right, let's start off with item number 2. We have approval of the June 27th meeting minutes and approval of the July 25th meeting minutes. Does anyone have any changes on any of those? We'll start first with June 27th. Any changes? And if I don't hear anything, can I get a motion for approval?
Move to approve, Gary Hutter.
Second
by Mike Hodge.
All right. If anyone is opposed, please raise your hand in the chat. Otherwise, we'll assume that you are in favor. All right. Seeing no hands raised, we will take that as a all in favor. And then for July 25th, any questions, changes, and motions?
This is Mike Hodge. I make a motion to approve.
Do I have a second?
Bob Day seconds.
All right, same as before. If you have a question or if you have a against, please raise your hand. Otherwise, we'll assume that everyone is in favor. All right, seeing no hands raised, unanimously passes. All right, we're in our information section now, and we'll start off with agenda item number 3, update on the Safe Streets and Roads for All grant. William, you're going to provide us a presentation?
That's right. Thank you, Lori. Hi, everybody. Before I dive into this update on the SS4A and the regional application, as always, a reminder of the various NOFOs that are both open and upcoming from USDOT for discretionary grants. Again, if you want to keep up to date with these NOFOs and their releases, you can provided there. And you can also sign up for updates from grants.gov. Moving on to the next slide. So the Safe Streets for All regional grant application, to date we've had several working group meetings with the joint applicants. This is the group of jurisdictions throughout the region that have agreed to be a part of CAMPO's regional application. We met on Tuesday, August 2nd to review draft application materials, and the joint applicants provided comments to CAMPO by August 12th. We've been in the process of revising based on those comments, and we're going to host another joint applicant working group meeting tomorrow to review those materials and set kind of the course of action for the submittal of the grant application. Next slide, please. Just a reminder of the way that we're satisfying local match on the SS4 application is through transportation development credits. CAMPO has developed the TDC application. It will be considered by the Transportation Policy Board for approval at the September meeting. The total budget we're submitting for the project is 2.9 million with 580,000 TDCs and $2.3 million of federal. And the secondary project that we put on that application that you'll see at the September board meeting is our ongoing project readiness for regional corridor improvements project, which was provided by concession funding. So it provides a non-federal secondary project. Okay, next slide, please. So next steps in this process, fairly straightforward at this point, asking the board for approval of those TDCs at the September meeting, finalizing grant application materials in coordination with the joint applicants, and then submitting by the September 15th deadline. And with that, I welcome any questions.
All right, any questions, comments on this?
Hi, Will. This is Nadia from Cat Metro. Just want to make sure that you don't need anything from us for your grant application. I know we're not I can't think of the right term, but we are interested in participating. So I don't know if we're happy to write a letter or something if that's needed.
Yeah, you're welcome to provide a letter of support if you'd like. It's not required as part of the grant application, certainly not required for the terminology we've been using as partners rather than joint applicants. Not my choice of definitions. That's literally what it says in the NOFO. But we can, yeah, if you'd like to provide a letter of support, we would certainly welcome it, and we can talk offline about that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nadia.
Is that something, Will? I know there's a lot of us that are participating as partners. Do you have maybe a template or something? Would you like other entities that are going to participate in that role to also support this?
Good question, Lori. We do have a template for letters of support that we sent to the joint applicants. I can send that to the wider group of the TAC and anybody from partner agencies that we've heard from. But they're actually not even requiring letters of support for the joint applicants either, per the language of the NOFO. But it never hurts to have that showing of support. So I can get that out to everybody, and we certainly welcome a letter of support if you'd like to provide one to us.
All right. One other question I have for the group is in order to meet the local match, there is going to be a request going to the policy board for the use of TDCs for this grant application. I was wondering whether or not there was someone that wanted to make a motion on the TAC to provide a letter of support or recommendation to the policy board for the use of the TDCs for this.
This is Mike Hodge. I would make that the motion to recommend those use of those.
Bob Day seconds.
All right. Any discussion, concerns about doing this? Okay. Hearing none, would you please pass along to the policy board that the TAC recommends the use of TDCs for the SS4A grant match? Okay, moving on to item number 4, project readiness. So Chad, are you going to start us off on this?
Yes, I will, Lori. Thank you. So before I hand this over to Eric to discuss latest steps in this process, I just want to note that we, in some of the feedback that we got from TAC members, we heard several requests to form a subcommittee to discuss these items in greater depth instead of having just a discussion, kind of a surface discussion here at TAC, having the opportunity for a subcommittee to discuss that. So that is something that we are going to request. We're going to request that the TVB form a subcommittee to discuss this particular topic. So just before we get into where we're at this stage and what we've heard so far, I just wanted to let everybody know that that'll be formed. That'll go before the board to form at the September meeting, and then we'll try to get that scheduled as quickly as possible after that, hopefully before the next TAC meeting. So with that, I'm going to go over to Eric for the update.
All right. Thanks, Chad. Yep, Eric Busker from BGE. Also here is Wes Yashek from BGE and Sam Higgins. And we also have Kevin Hoffman from RPS. So just a brief recap of the segmentation exercise. We have 9 corridors overall, 35 segments across those corridors. Just a reminder that these are very long corridors that have a lot of varying challenges and characteristics. So we just want to recognize and consider those differences as we're getting into prioritization. Then another reminder that some segments may be combined if the results of the prioritization indicate kind of some similarities and benefits to combining segments for further study. Next slide, please. So last month we presented the draft evaluation criteria for your review. We received a lot of good feedback, primarily which circled around the intent to consider more forward-looking criteria to capitalize on some opportunities to get ahead of growth and development. We also heard feedback with questions on how specifically some of the criteria would be calculated. What we're going to do is we'll walk through some of the changes here during this call, but then later this week we'll also be sending out a formal comment response matrix to the TAC for your review and concurrence. The changes we wanted to highlight here on this call include that we've added a few additional kind of major categories, and those are planning, regional impacts, and multimodal elements. We'll get into the specific metrics under those categories here shortly. But if you'll notice, each of the major categories also now line up with the previous TIP project call. Kevin's going to get more into that in just a minute. The other thing we did was we added a category called opportunities and risks. The intent of this is to identify kind of some subjective criteria.
Okay, I'm in a TAC meeting. Just if you.
We're looking forward to you. All right, sorry. So the other thing we did was added a category called opportunities and risks. The intent of that category is to identify the subjective criteria that should be considered when determining which projects or studies to begin. So these are things that are sometimes harder to quantify that could really impact project readiness. So opportunities like available right-of-way or large developments that we're aware of that we can get a hold of, or risks like the ability to acquire right-of-way in a reasonable time frame, or large utilities that could take years to relocate, things like that. So the biggest takeaway from this slide is that last time we talked about approaching this as kind of identifying segments of greatest need, and now the kind of hybrid approach is we'll still look at the need within a segment, but also we want to consider opportunities to get ahead of growth and development, and ultimately maximize project readiness. Next slide, please. Okay.
And as Eric mentioned, the details associated with the criteria are very relevant and similar to the TIP criteria, which has been previously reviewed and approved by the board for development of the TIP process. In addition to that, you can see a lot of the details here associated with each of the characteristics, and as well as the scoring or percentage breakdown per criteria that we'll be evaluating along the corridors. I will note that 2 categories within the previous TIP selection criteria, including modification and funding, have been retroactively put into different categories, which include the regional impact and the economic development sections, increasing those roughly 5% in each situation. And that is, again, is to account for some of the improved economic development associated with approved plats that Eric had previously mentioned in our current investigations. And again, for these elements, a lot of these are measurable metrics that we can take existing data on or compare data with growth information that we have available based off current trends to include that into our calculations for overall development of criteria for each segment. And then from there, we'll begin calculating and evaluating each segment for prioritization. Next slide, please.
All right, so quick overview of the process that we'll kind of take moving forward. So we're here finalizing the evaluation criteria, hopefully by the end of this week, incorporating any feedback we hear today, as well as the feedback that we've gotten over the last few weeks. Then we'll proceed with collecting all the data identified, which is already well underway, as well as identifying the subjective criteria to include for consideration. We'll present the preliminary results to the TAC subcommittee. The deliverable for that meeting is going to be a dashboard that indicates the composite score for each segment, but it will have kind of an interactive component, so we'll be able to see segment-specific scores and also average scores across the entire corridor. We'll be able to do things like, turn on safety only, for example. You got the segments ranked from that perspective. And again, that'll also provide consideration for the subjective criteria. But again, that all kind of forms the guide that the subcommittee will then use for discussion, because we know that just the raw output and the quantitative results doesn't necessarily indicate everything that we want to consider. And then we'll put together all these recommendations, present them to the TAC for their review and concurrence prior to presenting to the policy board for the further consideration. Next slide, please. So just from a similar idea, but from a schedule and timeline perspective for each of those activities, we're moving quickly. We're finalizing the evaluation criteria this week, and then at the September 12th policy board meeting, as Chad mentioned, it will be the formation of the subcommittee. Then we'll get a meeting scheduled with that subcommittee, that's the star there in blue, in mid-September to review the results, as we said, and to identify the preliminary recommendations. At the September TAC meeting, scheduled for September 26th, we'll review the recommendations developed by the subcommittee, and then we'll take any feedback we receive, discuss necessary revisions, and finally anticipate asking the policy board to vote and approve of the recommended studies to move forward with at the November policy board meeting. So a lot of work to do between now and then. Obviously the schedule could change based on a variety of input, but we just want to move as quickly as possible so we can get these studies started. I think with that, we'll open it up for any questions.
All right, I know, I heard that there was quite a bit of discussion on this on the last meeting. Does anybody have any questions or further discussion?
This is Bob. I'm going to one more time say that your continued use of matrices to try to come up with an answer for project selection and prioritization is a process of failure. And I'm not saying that some of the numbers aren't great to know. All data is good data. But if that is how you pick things, because you're afraid of having somebody questioning decisions, I will tell you that planning judgment and looking at the data and looking at the situations, that will get you to a better place than just putting numbers in a matrix and standing back and going voila. And so I would strongly recommend the use of a committee to make the recommendations after looking at the data and not have it be just a spreadsheet.
So, Bob, that's basically what we've laid out. So we've got to go through some sort of process, just because of what we live in. I'll put it that way. So we're going to walk through that data, but that if we can go back a couple of slides, might be the 3 slides back. Next one, please. That one. So the opportunity, well, no, that's not it. So, but
The one that has all the down?
no, maybe it's the one after that. Okay, I don't see it. So, so we're going to do that, and then the subcommittee will get what comes out of the matrix exercise, and the subcommittee can recommend to either go forward with that, they can change it, or they can say, you know, we don't agree with this at all, and here's what our recommendation is, and then we take that to the full TAC. So that's the process that I think we're on.
Ed,
Thank
did
you.
you have a question?
I think I'd echo what Bob said, that, you know, there's so many segments that are out there, you know, everybody wants to get something moving forward, and there's not enough money to do everything. And yeah, there's probably gonna need to be some qualitative and, you know, judgment that's done to kind of sometimes, you know, spread the wealth. I don't know, maybe that's just not the right way to say it, but that's kind of what happens many times. And, you know, of course, the board has the ultimate decision, but we can, you know, take a look at all the information that comes out and say, does this make sense from just the smell test, basically? You know, because some corridors may rank pretty high. I mean, they're going to be good ones, but there's others that are probably more pressing that may not score as high. So that's something to take that into consideration. And I'm just doing that from observations for a long time of, you know, political and regional interest.
Okay.
Okay, thanks, Ed. Charlie, you were next.
Right. Again, I'm just agreeing with both Bob and Ed. I think the use of the subcommittee is being used too far down the line. It's got to be looking at that criteria, whether it is a matrix or not. I'm afraid if we wait till after the criteria, I mean, it's been saying finalize evaluation criteria. I think we're locking in too quick. And I know the plan is to, you know, move levers and dial knobs and see how it comes out. But I think we need to be looking a lot early, or getting the subcommittee a lot earlier, looking at, as Bob said, whether even the matrix style of trying to find out what the most, you know, important corridors are. I think we could be making a big misstep right at the beginning that's going to just snowball down the line if we are not successful right at the beginning. So I'm in total agreement with Bob and Ed. Let's take a look with this subcommittee a lot earlier on exactly how to proceed.
Okay, Tom Godala.
Yeah, good afternoon. I had 2 questions, Ashby, and for, I guess, CAMPO staff. Your schedule that you had up showed a November decision, but you said potentially going maybe longer than that. Is there a deadline for this, or is this something that we are just, it's just a target, but it could go January, February, worst case scenario? Is that a possibility?
There's no deadline on this from the board. So it's on for November for the board to take action on it, because normally we don't meet in December.
Right.
And then the other reason why you're seeing a decision point for the board in this year is next year, well, in November, we've got at least 5 or 6 board members that are up for re-election. We could see a significant change in the board, and I would prefer not to start all over again, because we'll lose several months.
Okay. So, and if I could just follow up, so then the subcommittee meeting is potentially, is your idea it would just be 1 meeting, or would there be time for 2, or would that be up to the subcommittee?
I think that's up to the subcommittee and yeah, up to the subcommittee.
Okay. And then sorry if I could follow up. So can you give me a high level overview one more time? This is, what was the dollar figure for this study? And then the end result of the study is really just to help evaluate prioritization of all those corridors and segments of the corridor based on a lot of this criteria and empirical data, correct?
So the total budgeted right now is $7 million.
Okay.
And the overall goal of this study is to get projects on the shelf and ready to go. So depending on what comes out of the exercise of prioritizing segments, we would look at which segments sort of come out on the top, then look at what we think needs to be done on those segments, because they won't all be the same work. Some of them may have been advanced, either by the state or by a local government. Depending on what stage of development it's in, we would pick it up from that point and move forward with it. But the ultimate goal is to get through schematics in some cases, but to be able to hand it to TxDOT and help tee them up for funding that may be coming down the road. And while we're on the subject of funding, the TxDOT Revenue Forecasting Committee that I'm on is meeting in another week or so. So I'll have a sense of money on the state side, but having seen the comptroller's report to the legislature, there's going to be a lot of money.
Okay. And Ashby and Lori, if I can, just one more question. As far as, so would this study help with future call for projects, funding, prioritization?
Yes, it will lend itself to that, but the board certainly won't be locked into it. But we will certainly be pushing these forward.
Understood, as I assumed. Thank you.
Great. Bob, I saw your hand go up and then back down. Is there something you wanted to add?
I just wanted to ask Ashby what the time frame was when he thought we might hear back on whether we were successful in securing additional planning funds.
I'll give you a rough guess, Bob, but I'm hoping we'll know something. I'm hoping we'll know something by November, because I'm working with our GEC team to put the proposal together, and then I'm taking that concept to the board in September. I mean, I'm September, October. I'm sorry.
So Bob and Ashby, with the question about additional planning funds, would it be such that we had this first 7 million, but then additional planning funds would be to take forward more segments as they could go through the process?
Yes, Lori. So basically what's going to happen is we're going to put together a proposal to give to TxDOT and ask for some of their available funding, since all these are on system roadways, and walk them through that process. And so I'm hopeful that we can get enough to advance a lot more quarters than we would have otherwise.
Lori, this is Will. I have a question when appropriate.
Sure, go ahead, Will.
Afternoon, everyone. Ashby, in some of the draft scoring criteria, I'm representing a rural growing county. Is there any value placed on, and I'm trying to think of a way to say this, on the scope and the ease and the reality of preserving a corridor? The officials in Caldwell County have a real desire to try to stay ahead of things and to preserve these corridors. They obviously, like everybody does, it's all a matter of perspective, has a lot of financial restraints, but there's a lot of low-hanging fruit. For example, in Caldwell County, if there was some minimal funding there to do some real corridor preservation throughout the entire county region, that 10 years from now, 20 years from now is going to have such a value to Caldwell County and to the region. Is there any aspect right now that kind of takes that consideration? Lori will remember Hayes County and City of San Marcos worked on stuff like this for Wonder World Drive and Ranch Road 12 going to Wimberley years ago, and there's a huge corridor preserved there today, and frankly, somebody's probably going to build into it here in the short future. But if we didn't do that 10, 15 years ago, that ability would not exist, and if it did, it'd be extremely more difficult and more expensive. Kind of rattling, but I hope you understand what I'm trying to say.
I understand, Will, and one of the previous slides had a diagram on it that showed opportunities and risks. That's what that's getting at, Will, is
Okay.
we want to get to that information through all of you as local governments. So in addition, going back to Tom Goodall's question about what are we trying to accomplish, one of the other things we're trying to do is get some of this stuff down in the plan so you as counties or cities can preserve right of way for the corridor. So yes, we see high value in that.
Okay. Thank you, Ashby.
Mm-hmm.
Ed, did you have another question?
Just more of a comment is that I went through and counted, there's 34 segments, and I mean, that's a daunting task to find enough money to do something with that. So I would start, putting out what the expectations are, what we can do for $7 million. It may just be a handful of segments. It's not going to be many, but I'm glad that maybe there's other opportunities to also get some funding through other resources, TechSouth or others. It's more of a comment than anything.
Okay, so I have a question for staff, CAMPO staff, and Bob and Ed and Charlie. In terms of the judgment element and not just putting in numbers and taking what comes out of a criteria, are you anticipating, and what you're asking for is that judgment portion of the decision-making process occur at the committee level, and that there is enough time at the committee level for them to come back to the full TAC, explain how they got it and why they think it is an appropriate decision, and then the TAC takes that forward to the policy board. So Bob, I see you got your hand up, so maybe you're going to respond.
Yes, I think that, back in the old days, that is what you did, is you had a subcommittee that evaluated things, and they looked at data, and then they also looked at qualitative issues and used engineering and planning judgment to then go back and make a recommendation to the committee as a whole. And that is what we would propose to do here.
So if you could go back to the slide that had the timeline on it of the meetings. So if you're going to have a subcommittee meeting in mid-September before the TAC meeting, is there the opportunity to have that second subcommittee meeting in early October, so that in essence, the TAC would almost go at it like the policy board, where maybe during the first TAC meeting, you hear some of the initial results and issues that the subcommittee is working through. And then the October TAC is when we finally make our recommendation to the policy board. Does that work in terms of timing?
I think it works, Lori. But now, if we get into this early on and we feel like we need to have some more time, and we need to have a December board meeting, then I'll recommend that to Chair Long.
So for the folks that are really feeling like this is wanting to be worked out and finding that agreed upon solution at the committee level, does that help to anticipate at least 2 committee meetings on it? And then possibly if it is that hairy, that it slides, is that good for folks?
So, Lori, before we get responses on that question, to help inform responses to that, we're working on getting the data, pretty soon. So, you're not looking at a month before you get the data. You're looking at a couple of weeks, right? Okay, I don't see anybody looking at me crazy. So,
I think the 2 subcommittee meetings definitely possible as well.
Yeah, in addition to the full TAC.
Correct.
Right.
Comments on that? Charlie?
No, two subcommittee meetings sounds good to me. The one thing I kind of was wondering, has the consultant taken a look at other NPOs and looked at, has this process been done successfully in another NPO? Did they use the criteria matrix that is being proposed here, or did they use something else? I always like to kind of take a look back and say, I'll borrow from someone else if it's a good process. Has that been done to kind of take a look? It's been done elsewhere and successfully, and maybe that's something the subcommittee starts from that point right there. But has that been done at this point in time?
To an extent, so the criteria and the weighting concept is pulled pretty much straight from the previous TIP project call. So regarding when it's been done before, that was kind of the idea, was to start with something that's kind of been vetted, discussed prior. Now regarding a different MPO going through this specific exercise, I'm not aware of one, but
yeah, we're in a lot of ways, Charlie, we're breaking new ground. So the only other MPO in the state that's gotten close to what we're talking about is NCT Cox. But most MPOs don't do project development work.
And
I say
NCT Cox
don't do project development work.
Their process is
Charlie, I'm sorry.
Their process is what is being proposed by the consultant?
I'd have to look. I can't tell you.
Okay.
So Chad saying no, he works there.
Yeah, Chad said no.
I was just in my time there, we never went through a process like this where we had multiple corridors teed up to study at one time that we were prioritizing. Typically, just one corridor had already been selected and was moving forward. So yeah, when I was there, we never went through anything like this. Certainly, similar case like we've mentioned here before, where there's prioritization and scoring that goes into ranking TIP projects and things like that. That's similar to what we do here. But I think it's, like you said, Charlie, it's something we can look into as kind of a starting point at the subcommittee to see if we're familiar with any other examples.
The only comment, then I'll get you. The only comment I would add is if it's only a judgment call, then the folks who are not selected first are going to think it's a purely political decision. And so I think what some criteria and going through a criteria process modified or discussed secondarily with some judgment steps on it provides a basis that we can all respond to our officials on. Hey, it went through a process that was as, I don't know that it's necessarily fair, but as data driven and engineering planning driven as possible. So with that, Cole.
How much additional funding are we seeking from TxDOT?
Cole, were you asking how much additional funding are we seeking?
Correct.
I don't know the exact number yet, so what I've asked the GEC team to do is to look at the segments and come up with some rough cost figures that they normally use for TxDOT purposes, and then I'll have a number. But, you know, right now, until I know what the exact number is, Cole, I'm planning on asking for $50 million. It may be more.
Golly, shoot big there, Ashby.
I thought I was being conservative.
Well, I still work for a smaller entity, so maybe, you know, it's just my perspective. Charlie?
Yeah, don't mean to put TxDOT on the spot, but I will, since it's, 90% of this is on system roadways. Is there any preference, or how is TxDOT looking at this on the way kind of we're heading with the subcommittee and looking at possible different way of evaluating these corridor segments?
So I can tell you one thing, we don't have a whole lot of construction capacity, at least in the first 4 years. We actually are on borrowed 2, 4, and 12 until it was 2029, but now that we're trying to top off CapEx North, it might be later than that. But in terms of development money, we can easily, provide feasibility study support with potentially CAMPO providing just that kind of PM role for us. So we can do a lot of feasibility studies within Plan Authority. And when you said 50 million, Ashby, I don't know if you mean construction, because, a lot of these are just getting ready for, preservation, if you will. And we have a lot of capacity right now in terms of our PEPS contracting. So we could offer that up in the Plan Authority realm.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Heather. And just so you know, we're not looking at district money.
Any more questions?
Oh, Charlie's got his hand up again.
Sorry, that was left over.
Oh, okay, leftover. All right, so do we know who is on the subcommittee? Did you all decide that last time, or is that still to be determined after we know the policy board?
Chair Long and I are going to work on that, but she said she will select the members.
Okay. Okie dokie. Kathy.
I just had one quick comment, and that would be to support what you said, Lori, about using real data for a lot of this so that it avoids misunderstanding. And there may be a way where the professional judgment category can be another one of the criteria so that it gets factored in, but there's ample evidence that we're using a lot of empirical data too. So that's all.
I appreciate that, Kathy. And I would also say, if we potentially want to have some of these projects either get funded potentially by the commission or funded out of federal funds through a discretionary grant, we got to be able to show them that we went through some sort of process.
Thanks, Kathy. You were so much more eloquent. So, all right. Any more discussion on this item? Okay. So now going to item number 5, discussion on 10-year transportation plan. Ryan.
All right. Thank you. This is Ryan Collins, Short Range Plan Manager with CAMPO. And this item is really just to discuss and kind of get your thoughts on our approach to the 10-year transportation plan. This is something that's kind of been around for a little bit, but a few MPOs have developed a 10-year plan, and I think HGAC and NCTCOG. And so we're But it's part of a state requirement that came out of House Bill 20 to develop a 10-year transportation plan. And so we did a lot of internal discussions, and as a matter of fact, I think we presented this to TAC a while back and kind of took a step back to kind of really see how we wanted to approach developing this 10-year plan. And what we've come down to is really going back to the intent of the legislative directive on developing this 10-year plan and what its function is. And what we realize is the plan's really function is to provide support for the regional selection of projects that are selected and individually listed in the Unified Transportation Program. This is specifically related to the state funding sources that came out of Prop 1 and Prop 7, and most of those are filtered through categories 2, 4, and 12. And so if you're familiar with category 2 is something that projects are selected for those funds jointly between the MPO and the district. Category 4, the same thing, and then as well as the commission discretionary funding, specifically strategic priority, as well as Texas Clear Lanes are funneled through category 12. So these are state funding resources that TxDOT does do the selection, but all these projects that are selected in collaboration with CAMPO. They do have our support, and they also reflect a combination of our state and regional priorities. And so what we're going to do and the way we're going to approach the 10-year plan is we're essentially going to take the individually listed projects that are listed in the Unified Transportation Program. I've got the 2023 one pictured there. It gets adopted every August every year. It's annually updated. Matter of fact, the process for updating it is essentially continual. As soon as they update the program, they begin developing the next one, which related to the revenue forecast that Ashby met. If you're not familiar with the Unified Transportation Program, they take the 10-year revenue forecast and select projects to fit within that 10-year revenue forecasting. So it is a fiscally constrained program, and so we are going to adopt a 10-year transportation plan or recommend this for the policy board to adopt every year in conjunction with the update of the UTP. So this will be a plan that is going to be updated on an annual basis in collaboration with the UTP program update. This is similar to NTT, COG, and HGAC, but do the same thing. The 10-year plans that I've seen from the MPOs in the state all focus specifically on 2, 4, and 12. And this is really just to reiterate our support for the selection of projects in the UTP. Joyce, if we go to the next slide. And this is really just a summary slide. I just want to kind of talk about how it slots into the overall planning process. I'm not going to go through everything. I think we're all familiar with the function of the RTP and how it selects projects for federal funding eligibility and how those projects get environmental clearance through NEPA. And then on the flip side of that, we have the federal required TIP, which is actually where the funding is actually allocated. We update it every 2 years, and that is the federal requirement. The two in the middle, the UTP and the 10-year plan, both state requirements. They have a 10-year horizon, and they will be updated annually. And again, the function specifically of the UTP, our 10-year plan is really to support the project selection for UTP and just to show our support for that. The UTP, as I mentioned earlier, it allows TxDOT to move forward and develop authority in years 5 through 10 because of the 10-year revenue forecast allows for those projects to eventually receive construct authority, which mimics what's in the TIP as well. So that's really just an overview. We're going to bring an actual draft version of the 10-year plan once the UTP is adopted by the commission on August 30th. So essentially a week from now, they're going to adopt that. We're going to reflect those individually listed projects in our 10-year plan. We'll bring that back to the TAG for your recommendation. We'll be taking this as an information item to the policy board in September, and then we'll be asking for adoption or approval in October from the policy board. So with that, that's our approach to it. Just want to give y'all, a chance to offer your feedback if y'all think, and see what you think about our approach to the 10-year plan. So with that, I'll take any questions. I see Ed's got one.
I was trying to find information on TxDOT website, but I had to go to the Texas Administrative Code to find out, any guidance, I guess, how this would be done. It's very not very detailed at all. I was wondering, does TxDOT have a guidelines that for the MPOs on how to develop the 10-year plan? Because basically what we're kind of doing now is just we're adopting what TxDOT's already adopted. It would seem like we might want to influence on the front end, which is the last year, say, that we start looking at projects that would be added in the year 2024, and be a collaborative process that way. I know there's collaboration that goes on throughout this whole processes, but it seems like instead of just adopting what TxDOT's adopted, that we may want to flip it around and help try to influence what will be added in the last year of each UTP.
You raise a good point, Ed, and that was one of the things, we do work with the district on the selection of projects that go into each UTP update, and this is really just enshrining that support. And I mean, we can certainly add documentation on how that process works, but we work closely with the district on projects that are selected in categories 2, 4, and 12. And so this is really just enshrining that collaboration in a document. And to your other point, there is no guidance regarding how the 10-year plan looks. So that's why, if you go back to the actual legislation, it just says MPOs will develop a 10-year plan. And that's really what kicked off our conversation internally about what we wanted this to look like. We even discussed having it even, being more robust, basically essentially taking this first 6 years of the RTP and smushing that together with the TIP and the UTP. And then it became in this huge document that we did not really think about what the function of that would be. And that's what made us step back, and we wanted to start with keep it as simple and functional as possible, because the intent really is to enshrine that support for those funding sources. And so that's why we tried to keep it minimized specifically to the UTP and bonded to that process, and documenting that. So I guess it's assumed that we're collaborating, but I'll make sure that there's a narrative and the documentation that really talks about how that process works throughout the year, because we do score projects that are submitted for the UTP through Decision Lens. So we do offer that support to the district. So, and this is very similar to the way I think NCTCOG does the same thing, where they have their scores and the district scores. It's submitted for the UTP. So that's just the most recent example I've looked at. But those are good points, though, Ed.
Yeah, I would think maybe there's a way to tie in, this corridor prioritization that we're doing as well. So, maybe we can go a little bit beyond and maybe have ideas of maybe saying these are other priorities of the region, a little bit outside the 10-year, but these are things that or products that possibly could be put into the UTP or the 10-year plan at the appropriate time.
Absolutely. Well, and you bring up a good point. Actually, the corridor program is listed in the UTP. It was a requirement for the SH 130 concession funding. So they will show up on that list. And I think the other thing that I wanted to show is a project development list, because we do have quite a bit of deferred projects that were previously funded with 2 and 4 that were deferred for 35. I will show those in the draft documentation. They won't be in the individual listed section, but they will be kind of in the matters box that's similar to the way they are in the TIP. So it will, kind of flesh out those projects as well.
Thank you for letting me comment. I appreciate it.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that, Ed, because I was also wondering how the corridor projects might integrate in with this. So thanks for the explanation, Ryan. Anybody else? Okay. Moving on to item 6, discussion on carbon reduction program.
Thank you. This item is really, if you've been following the IIJA and all of the new programs and funding sources that are coming out of that, one of those is called the Carbon Reduction Program, and this is a new formula program that provides funding specifically to reduce transportation emissions from mobile emission sources, so tailpipe emissions, essentially. But the CRP program, they just released guidance on it a couple of months ago, and this is a program that is distributed by formula. So CAMPO, as a TMA, is going to receive approximately $22 million for distribution within the TMA. The way I like to think of this program is it's kind of a rebranded TASA program. It has a lot of similar requirements. It has a 4-year obligation limitation. So once the funding is allocated to the region, we have 4 years with which to obligate it. It does have a local match requirement, 80-20, typical, and then also location eligibility. So you'll see the breakdown of the fiscal years on the left of what we will approximately receive. Now, we have for 2022 received $4.3 million for funding obligation. So that's just a high-level summary. One of the important things on the next slide, Joyce, is that there is a planning requirement as part of this program where we do have to develop a regional carbon reduction plan that's going to outline carbon reduction strategies. Now, this is a requirement. We have to do it. And so what we're going to be doing is we're going to be requesting a portion of that $4.3 million from the policy board for staff to move forward with developing a regional carbon reduction plan. Now, the intent of this plan is really to develop regional goals and objectives, provide targets. There is a new performance measure requirement specific to carbon reduction that's going through the rulemaking process right now. So along with all the PM1, 2, and 3 targets that we set every year, carbon reduction is going to be a new one potentially, and so we wanted to get ahead of that and go ahead and look at setting targets for the region. But the most important part of this plan is really to develop strategies and analyze the effectiveness of those strategies, and then prioritize and recommend activities for CRP funding. So for the entire program, we want to use this plan essentially to set out, what works, what provides the best value for the region, and then so sponsors can submit projects that fall under those effective strategies, and that we can fund them through a project call. Again, this plan would be developed regionally. We'll have a stakeholder committee, similar to all the other plans that we put together. This will have everybody's chance for input, TAC, stakeholder committees, and also in a large part it will be an academic exercise, I think, looking at these strategies, but just ensuring that we're getting the most bang for our buck out of the CRP. And one of the questions, Lori, I think you had, or Gary, if you'll go to the next slide, I do want to talk about what the eligibilities are. So codified in law, they already do have some eligible activities. So any TASA projects would automatically qualify for carbon reduction funds. We're looking at public transportation. ITS and operations are a big component of it. And then other things such as deployment of alternative fuel vehicles, diesel engine retrofits, things that we don't normally fund, but they can be funded through this program. And one of the things I want to address through the plan development is also to look at anything that might not be listed on here. If we do our due diligence and assess some random activity that may actually have an impact on carbon reduction, we can list that in our plan and potentially fund that through those funds. So I think the planning process will give us the ability as a region to really kind of think outside the box to a certain extent if we would like to, and see if there's something that may provide a benefit to the region. So just wanted to brief y'all on that. Still developing the scope and everything like that, and we'll be requesting the policy board to allocate those funds. We'll potentially have to ask for TDCs to support the match for the CRP funding for the plan development, but our intent is to get the plan developed within the next year so that we can do a project call for the remainder of the funding. So pretty exciting program. Again, this is formula, and this will be, we'll have these funds through the next 5 years, and potentially I'm sure they'll extend the IIJA, so it'll be continuing. But if anybody has any questions or thoughts or ideas for it, please let me know. I think Ed might have a question.
Yes, is the transportation alternatives, is that no longer a program?
No, it's still a program. I think they took the TASA and kind of rebranded it for this, but no, TASA still very much exists.
Okay. And then if it takes a year to do the program, to get well, I guess my question is, can the fiscal year 22 year dollars, can those be spent now? Or?
Yes. So we do have that option. There was a debate of whether or not we had access to the funds before we had a carbon reduction strategy adopted. Going back to statute, the planning requirement stays, but we can obligate to these eligible activities. So we could potentially do that. That was something we kind of were tossed around internally, whether or not to go ahead and obligate the entirety of the funds. But my thought was that we would do the plan first, so that would dictate how we spend the funding for the program.
Yeah, that would make more sense to me. And Ed, the money can roll over, so it's not like we're going to lose it if we don't.
We have 4 years on it.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, that was our intent. intent with the plan is to really guide the funding call that would come after that naturally. But, you know, if it came to it, we could roll this into a tacit call and spend the funding. But I think, you know, the thing for me was just looking at the intent of the program and not knowing which of these eligible activities is more effective than the other, which is what I intend the plan to do is to suss out which of these would give us the most value. Because it's not a ton of money, you know, $22 million, all things considered. So I think it's critical to make sure we're spending it on the programs that are going to have the most impact on the emission reduction.
Yeah, all good points. I'm just wondering that, so if it takes a year to do the plan and you have the program call, I guess you'd have fiscal year 22, 23, and then 24 available by the time you do the program call.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we would allocate, or at least the entire program, but yeah, we would have 3 years worth of funding immediately available.
Yeah.
And, absolutely right.
And I understand, that can be rolled over, but, with inflation and everything else, it all, you start reducing it by whatever percent of inflation is, that takes away a little bit. So the sooner we get things implemented or started to implement, that'd be a goal that I would support.
That's a fair point. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, Bob, you have your hand up?
I'm assuming that bike ped is included in transportation alternatives?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so anything that's eligible under TASA, bike ped, basically anything that's not at a capacity is eligible for this program.
Okay, Tom?
Yeah, I also had a question as far as related to bike ped. So if there was a trail and a ped bridge, something like that, that gets awarded or funded, is that whole project still reviewed through a TxDOT process?
It'll be reviewed through our project selection criteria.
Oh, for scoring and selection, but once you're awarded and under construction, are plans reviewed by TxDOT?
It would be treated very much like a TASA project where you would go through TxDOT.
All right, thank you.
Kathy?
I just wanted to make sure that the regional plan will cover everybody and you don't need to have a local carbon reduction plan to be able to apply.
No, you don't. It's just that the region needs to have one, or the state. And so this brings up a good point, is that the state was allocated some funding as well. We can adopt the state's carbon reduction strategy if they do one. I haven't heard whether or not TxDOT is going to, and that's why we want to move forward with doing our own regional one. But you won't, as a sponsor or individual local government, have to have one on file. So that's nothing to worry about. Once we meet this requirement, we're good to go. And another thing I wanted to point out is that they broke out the small urbanized areas, and so San Marcos is a small urbanized area within our CAMPO region. The state was allocated $168,000 through this program for this fiscal year. So I think essentially $1 million through the 5-year program is allocated to the small urbanized area for San Marcos, but that will be run through the state. So CAMPO is responsible for the TMA funding. But I just wanted to point that out. So that may be something, there's an opportunity there, I think, to collaborate with the state on that funding for the San Marcos area. So Lori, I'll definitely keep you up to date on that. But just wanted to point that out.
Okay, anybody else? All right, thank you for that. Item 7, update on regional TDM subcommittee. Gary.
Yes, ma'am. So we had a subcommittee meeting a week ago today, actually in person. It's nice to get everybody together for change. Consultant led us through an exercise with 5 focus areas for us to, we actually had little stickers that we stuck on the things that were prioritized, that we prioritized. And the areas were support, expand existing programs, target targeting congested corridors, supporting essential workers, implement rural TDM services, and increase regional coordination. Results of that exercise were heavily weighted to school pool. There was some grant funding to cities and counties to support the TDM activities. Some additional outreach to essential workers, and some additional marketing campaigns. Carpools, van pools, carts, some of the other services. School pool thing, for those that have been paying attention to the news, we're having an extreme, just ironically right now, we're having an extreme bus driver shortage. So most of the school districts are being impacted this year right now at this time with bus driver and bus capacity. The school pools seem to be a pretty popular opportunity for some TDM help in the not too distant future. And then we plan to meet again in October. So at that time, we will have some details from the consultant to discuss some costs and constraints. Moving it forward. Be happy to answer any questions.
All right. Any questions for Gary or Niev? Okay. Seeing none. I was going to try to think of something really hard for you, Gary.
No need.
Testing whether you really are attending and listening on all those meetings. All right, so we're at item number 8, report on transportation planning activities.
All right, thank you, Joyce. Todd Gibson here, short range planner with CAMPO. I'll go over the quarterly report, the second quarterly report of 2022 that was due at the end of July. There's a few milestones that were reached during this reporting period, so I'll go over those with y'all. The North Lamar Airport Boulevard project from Capital Metro began preliminary engineering and environmental. And then the City of Austin projects, Slaughter Lane and William Cannon, both completed PS&E. And then the Slaughter Lane project also completed preliminary engineering. Then we have the City of Round Rock, Gaddis School Road, Segment 6. That project led. And then we have Hayes County projects, the FM 621 and SH 80. Both of those projects began construction. And then next slide, please, Lois. And then the City of Buda, RM 967, and then the Cedar Park, Brushy Creek Regional Trail, City of San Marcos, Winter Road Drive, as well as the Williamson County project, Brushy Creek Regional Trail Phase 5, all indicated that they were completed during this past report. So with that being said, I do want to make a note that all of the Category 9 projects from the 2018 project call have been obligated in the federal system. So there's no projects that are going to have any funding left. So I just want to make note of that too. If anybody has any questions on these projects, I can go and answer those now.
Charlie.
Yeah, real quickly, Todd, when a project is complete, is that end of construction and the 1-year maintenance period is over, or what determines completion? Because there's a project, Manchac Road, that TxDOT, it's under Travis County as a sponsor, but it's a on system TxDOT
yeah, for our
project.
reporting requirements, we actually have two different indications of completion. We have when the project actually is finished with construction, and then the next is when it's actually closed out in the TxDOT system. So those projects here were indicated that construction had ended, and then there's a few that have closed out in the TechStop system, so.
Okay,
Actually
so
have two
it's,
different.
so it's kind of the milestone is complete, or, you know, completing the TxDOT requirement, basically.
Correct.
Okay. I just thought Manchac Road has been complete for a while and it keeps showing up as continuing, and it just, to me, it's complete, but I'll wait till TxDOT says it, so. Thanks.
Yeah, sometimes it takes a while for things to close out in the system. I mean, it can take a year or two sometimes.
Okay, all right.
Just all that finalized paperwork.
But Charlie, you make a good point, because, you know, now we're having, as a result of the previous federal bill, FAST Act, where in its performance-based planning sort of paradigm, and we should be sort of looking at it when it's open to public use, because that's what we're going to have to do the public the performance measures off of.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Thanks, Ashley.
Mm-hmm.
I would agree with Charlie, because construction completion is kind of the milestone from a more of a public and use perspective, versus by the time paperwork gets closed out through TxDOT, which can take a really long time. So you should be seeing, Ashby, an invitation for our Hopkins Street project. We completed that and it's open to traffic, and going to have something there. So we'll have another project we can add for the next quarter. So
I like ribbon cutting.
we were talking about that we thought you liked them, so that's why we wanted to share. All right, so TIP amendment cycle, Ryan.
Hey, yeah, so just update on the TIP amendment cycle. We did close it out on Friday. Did get some submissions that I'll be going through this week. We got some from TxDOT and Williamson County, so I've talked with Joyce, and I think we're going to, depending on what comes out of the review of those, if they're administrative or not, but if we do a full amendment cycle, we'll be doing that, doing the public involvement in October, along with the public hearing at the policy board in October, with potential approval at the November board meeting. So just wanted to update everyone on that. And then today, or actually got the email today that the STIP has opened, so we're going to be putting the adopted TIP from May into the eSTIP system this week. So hopefully that will get approved in the next few months by FHWA. So just want to give a quick administrative update on all the back-end stuff regarding the TIP. So very boring stuff, but important. So yeah, that's it. So thank you.
And Lori, we had talked last week about also providing a quick model update. And I've spoken with Greg, and Greg, still online?
Yeah.
All right, if you could provide that for the committee, please.
All righty. Hello, everybody. Greg Lancaster, modeling manager for CAMPO. Since my last update, we've had several meetings with cities and counties. We also had our second TWG meeting. All of those were very productive. We are nearing completion on the 2020 highway and transit networks and should start doing base year model runs by the end of the month. And if everything goes well, we should have a validated 2020 base year in early January. After that, we'll begin working on the 2025, 2030, and 2050 forecast runs with a model completion estimated around May of 2023. To meet this deadline and stay within TxDOT's scope, we'll need to have the forecast demographics and networks in place by the end of the year. Right now, the networks are looking good and should meet this date. One of the final data sets that we're going to need for that is the fiscally constrained 2050 project list. That way we can add those projects into the model and be ready to run the 2050 forecast. And you can expect to hear more about that in the coming months. The demographics, they're still a work in progress right now, but they are coming along well. We have received input from most everyone that we requested data from, and we're still working with a couple of counties and cities to finalize their data. But to stay within the demographic timeline, we're going to have a hard date of September 8th to receive comments and data. And we're currently starting to run Urban Sim model. And we're doing that we're doing that with the model, with the data we currently have, so that we can make sure it runs correctly and get out any bugs that we need to get out. After internal review, we'll be sending out the initial run to the stakeholders for comment, which should be early in October. And we'll incorporate their comments, rerun Urban Sim, and resend the updated run to the stakeholders in mid-November. Then we'll finalize the demographics by the end of December and present that to our TWG. And once it's gone through them, we will present it to the TAC after that. And I will be giving updates on that to the TAC in between time. That's where the model stands right now, and I'll take any questions.
Thanks, Greg. Any questions? Charlie?
I may have missed it. Greg, you said financially constrained projects by when? I didn't get the date.
I didn't give a date for that. I just wanted to warn you that it's coming.
I mean, are you talking within months or next spring?
Yeah, we'll need to finish the 2050 network. I would love to have it done by the end of the year, but that could probably push into January.
Okay. All right.
Oops, I'm muted and I'm talking to myself. All right, September 12th, policy board meeting. So on that one, we will have the subcommittee for the corridor analysis, and then also the TDC discussion with the board, correct, Chad Ashby?
That's correct.
And then coming back to the TAC on September 26th, we may or should have some update, at least on the corridor analysis. And anything else you kind of see on the horizon for the TAC for the September meeting?
I had talked to Chad, and we were tentatively planning on devoting that whole meeting to quarters.
Okay. Okay. So it looks like that 26 will be an important meeting for everyone to be tuned in on. So if that's it, can I have a motion to dismiss, end, withdraw, whatever? Adjourn, that's the word.
Gary Hunter, motion to adjourn.
I second. Thank y'all. I assume it's unanimous. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Lori.